But regarding Atta, there's still many unanswered questions about September 10th, which is what we're about to try to find answers for, where authorities haven't provided anything reasonable or are ever really forthcoming as far as what Atta and Al-Omari really traveled to Maine for, other than presumably to lessen their exposure through airport security at Logan, which makes no sense either. And then on the day after 9/11, there is also the question regarding additional and unaccounted for conspirators staying at Boston area hotels who were at least detained, particularly at Weston Copley. But going back to ABC News with Brian Ross also reporting on September 12th, he reported this.
Also today, authorities were tracking another set of 6 hijackers who were believed to have entered the country from Canada at a small border crossing in Jackman, Maine. The men are then believed to have flown into Boston on commuter flights yesterday morning.
Sources telling CNN that 2 of the hijackers apparently crossed from Nova Scotia, Canada by ferry to the port of Bar Harbor in the state of Maine.
Well, authorities telling the CBC today that they're working in Jackman, Maine, which is a small border crossing between Nova Scotia and Maine, and also at the Yarmouth area, and they've requested the manifests of the ferry that runs from Yarmouth to Portland, Maine.
Peter, there are few comments, no details. All Canadian authorities will say is yes, they are investigating.
In Halifax, a car meticulously stripped and dusted. But the RCMP will not discuss the search for a Canadian connection.
And another rental car belonging to other suspects was found at a jet port in Portland, Maine. And that car may be the key to all the speculation about a Canadian connection.
Basically, with all the indications of these reports, Atta and Al-Omari must have at some point rendezvoused with other operatives that came in from Canadian borders by way of northwest through Jackman, Maine, and then northeast from Bangor and Bar Harbor, originating from Nova Scotia by ferry, where there's also another rental car Canadian authorities were searching at the Halifax airport. But again, with ABC's Brian Ross reporting on September 12th, first announcing Atta's name publicly, he had also detailed this earlier.
Yesterday, the police chief in Portland, Maine has told us that 5 men came across the border in Jackman, Maine. They all tried to board a commuter flight out of Bangor, but there was only room for 3 of them. The 2 others went on to Portland. They reportedly boarded a U.S. air commuter at 5:53 yesterday morning to make the connection in Boston. We're not clear whether it was the connection to the American flight or the United flight, but it's clear that they came in from Canada just before this flight.
In the Associated Press, written by David Sharp on September 13th, it states that not only did the FBI also sought passenger manifests from 2 ferries that travel between Nova Scotia and Maine, the Scotia Prince in Portland and the Cat in Bar Harbor. So it seems that Atta and Al-Omari potentially were able to meet with additional suspects coming from Canada directly into Portland, Maine, by way of 1 ferry boat, rather than all the way up in the northern part of the state in Bar Harbor and Bangor. But the Associated Press article additionally states that the FBI were also focusing its attention on a cell phone company in Bangor, Maine, where agents interviewed employees at Unicel's corporate office on Union Street next to the Bangor airport. The vice president of Unicel stated that the FBI agents were interested in knowing more about several men who attempted to buy cell phones recently. In a New York Times article titled "After the Attacks, the Hijackers, FBI Traces Path of 5 in New England" from September 13, 2001, written by James C. McKinley, Jr. and Kate Zernick, it states, federal agents question employees at a store in Bangor, where 5 Arab men believed to be hijackers tried to rent or buy cell phones late last week. When the employees refused to sell phones because the men lacked proper identification and were not Maine residents, the men displayed a large amount of cash, but the employees did not accept an offer from the men to buy the phones for $3,000. The men then phoned the Bangor airport trying to get a flight to Boston, but were told there was no flight that matched their desired departure time, the authorities said. The men then phoned Portland International Jetport, where 2 of them apparently made reservations for a flight to Boston on Tuesday morning. But these reports do not corroborate an Atta and Al-Omari driving the rental car all the way up to Bangor, Maine on September 10th. As if they had potentially met up with additional conspirators crossing over from Canada from either directions on the eve of 9/11. Because, as the New York Times article details, the attempt to rent or purchase cell phones happened late last week. Plus, others may have crossed in from a second border entrance by land from Canada to Maine through the town of Calais. According to Bangor Daily News, September 13, 2001, in that additionally, there was also a red pickup truck with New York plates found next to a store there, which was reported as suspicious and possibly being connected to the attacks. But a month later, also in the Bangor Daily News on October 13th, bringing even more clarity in an article by Doug Kessley, question of Bangor linked to attacks unanswered, that 3 area taxicab drivers say they provided rides to people they believe to be hijackers 10 days before the attack. A cab driver named Laura Monteith said she picked up 3 men at about 12:45 a.m. outside Jimmy V's, a Bangor bar and restaurant. She said she can't forget the face or words of the man who sat in the front seat with her. Shown separate pictures of the hijackers, she identified Mohammed Atta. She also identified one of them as Flight 175 hijacker, Fayez Banihammad. Monteith also said that the third passenger in the back didn't have the Middle Eastern appearance of the other 2. She said he was tall and lanky with blonde hair and glasses and was wearing tan dress slacks, a tan shirt, and a thin brown jacket. Another cab driver, Tom Sullivan, said that the day before the terrorist attacks, he took several men resembling the terrorists to Staples at the Airport Mall in Bangor and later dropped them off at the Bangor Mall. And a third cab driver, who did not want to be identified, said that on Saturday, September 8, he brought 4 men he now believes were among the terrorists to Ames department store at the Airport Mall. He said that they were in a rush to make a 4:30 p.m. flight and quickly bought 7 or 8 suitcases. But separate from these reports with the known hijackers Atta, Al-Omari, and Banihammad previous to 9/11, these circumstances regarding operatives crossing over Canadian border and at Bangor, Maine, was also picked up by Robert Russo of the Canadian Press in a headline titled FBI Searches for Canadian Link, where it mentions that former Chief of Counterintelligence for the CIA, Vincent Canestraro, told Montreal Gazette that U.S. investigators knew that 5 men recently entered Maine from Canada via ferry boats from Yarmouth and or remote border station near Jackman, and also confirming 3 of them from Bangor Airport, boarded a feeder plane, but only 3 of them could get on board because it was full, and the other 2 went to Portland and got a flight from Portland, which could likely mean several possible scenarios for the additional potential hijackers unable to depart from Bangor Airport, since it clearly states that 5 of them came over from Canada, and it's known that Atta and Al-Omari both drove up to Maine from Boston in a rental car and would have likely already had their reservations set at Jetport. And as previously mentioned before, they arrived and checked into Comfort Inn at 5:43 p.m. and from the other security surveillance video capturing them in what seems to be shopping and running errands throughout Portland, there is also the possibility they could have been accompanied with others, judging from the exchange at the gas station where they are frequently looking outside the direction of their parked rental car, and that the images of them inside Walmart are a select few, possibly cherry-picked. It's hard to determine if they were accompanied by anyone else while in Portland, considering the limited security video that's been released of them at a bank teller and shopping in stores, particularly when other security videos in the Portland vicinity through town are also cherry-picked. According to the 2002 documentary Portrait of a Terrorist Mohammed Atta, he and Al-Omari also go to this drive-up bank teller and are captured on security video, but it's neither released publicly. In fact, according to the Syracuse Post-Standard from September 21st, listing an Associated Press article, stated that the FBI received surveillance tapes on September 13th from the Kittery Trading Post in Kittery, Maine, just outside the border of New Hampshire, well before Portland, in which 2 men described to be Atta and Al-Omari were allegedly inside the store inquiring about knives and rubber bullets on September 10th, which again, the security surveillance video hasn't been made public either, but it does certainly seem like part of Atta's and Al-Omari's mission was to rendezvous with other operatives who crossed over from Canada from at least 3 different directions, and that there's this additional unaccounted for rental car at the Canadian side of the border at Halifax Airport that government authorities were thoroughly investigating as part of the 9/11 attacks. We'll get into discovering what likely activity those other rendezvousing suspects were supposed to be involved in.
A couple of other strands of many here. The Portland Press-Herald reporting today that in Portland, Maine, one of the hijackers, it is reported, had lived for at least a year and may have had a relationship, in fact, with a local woman.
The Portland Press-Herald article that CNN's Bill Delaney is referencing about a local woman in a relationship with one of the hijackers was thought to be Abdelaziz Al-Omari. But then the Boston Herald corrected the story in the article, Law Enforcement Officer Still Sifting Through Tips. On Friday, the Portland Press-Herald reported that a 31-year-old woman may have had a relationship with one of the terrorists. but it turns out the man was not one of the two terrorists, the newspaper reported Saturday. Tips from a University of Southern Maine student and a woman led police to investigate a man who allegedly kept a gun under his pillow, claimed to be a terrorist, and left a month before the attacks, Portland Police Chief Michael Chitwood said. Portland detectives could find no connection between the man and the two suspects, and they turned their findings over to the FBI, he said. The man, who said he was moving to California, aroused suspicions because he claimed to be a terrorist from Turkey, stayed at various motels in Portland, and always had money despite not holding a job, Chitwood said.